Namo Buddhaya and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV Saturday program. I am Lisa Chu. Today we will start with a Dharma talk followed by a Buddhist song. Today's Dharma talk is by a highly respected Buddhist monk from the United Kingdom, Venerable Ananda Jyoti. The Venerable has devoted many years to study and research Buddhism, delving deeply into a wide range of important topics. In this series of talks, he presents an insightful exploration of the life of Buddha, focusing on three significant events: his birth, his enlightenment, and his final passing away. These lectures are rich with historical research, backed by numerous facts that bring clarity and depth to his presentation. In this three-part series is not to be missed. Each part offers a rare opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of the Buddha's life through scholarly yet accessible teaching. Now please join me in welcoming the Venerable Ananda Jyoti Mahathera to deliver the first part of his remarkable series.
So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is these four Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms in Nusantara. So Nusantara covers the Malay Peninsula and what we now call Indonesia. As an overall term, we use this term Nusantara. The four places we're going to be looking at are Bujang Valley, which is in Kedah, and then Srivijaya in Sumatra, and then the Sailendra dynasty, which is where Borobudur is, and then Majapahit in eastern Java. The reason this area became so important is because of the trade between India and China. Now there are different trade routes between India and China. The first trade route, which is very familiar for people, because this is the route that Zhongshan, for instance, took from Chang'an down into, the Buddhist heartland around what we now call Patna. That's not far from Bodh Gaya. It's actually a really difficult route, although Zhongshan set out with something like 30 people when he started that trip, or along the way he picked up about 30 people. Most of them died on the way because of the difficulty, first of all, crossing the desert. This is the Tarim Basin here, and apart from the Sahara Desert, this is the biggest desert in the world, and it's a really difficult desert to cross. But once you've crossed the desert, you've got to get over the Pamir Mountains, which are some of the highest passes in the world, 4,000 odd meters high. So a lot of the people who died on that trip actually died trying to get over those mountains because the weather is so bad, the air is so thin, and it just almost impassable, you see. So one of the main routes through for this very profitable trade between India and China was this overland route that went through the desert and then over extremely high mountains and was very dangerous. Of course, it was very profitable as well, and that's why people actually did it. And this is the way that Buddhism originally went into China. It spread along, these areas, first of all up into Kashmir, and then into what we now call Central Asia, and then into, Xinjiang, and into China proper, and into Chang'an, for that matter. Chang'an is the old name for Xi'an, yeah? Like this. So that was one way merchants established the trade between China and India. There was a second route which came through Myanmar for whatever reason, which I'm not really sure, this route seems to have been not used very much. But there was a route, and it was there, but it seems not to have been so popular, which I presume means that, you know, this must be even more difficult somehow than going, you know, through a desert and over these really high mountains. It must have been like quite impassable or something like that for it not to have been used, because for one thing it's shorter. You know, you would think that they would want to go. There's no deserts. There are mountain ranges, of course, but this was the second route, but it doesn't seem to have been used so much. The third route, which is the route that concerns us, are the sea routes, the Silk Roads that went along the sea routes. So these were coming down from Patna. You could get to the coast quite easy, and also from southern India you could get to the coast quite easy, and then you can either come down here and then you can go through the Straits of Malacca and then around Singapore, and they would land somewhere near Shanghai and then cross inland to Chang'an, which is the main, you know, it was the capital in those days. So it was the main center that people were trying to get to, where they could sell. On the one hand, they can sell the goods that they brought from India. On the other hand, they can then buy the silkwares and various other things that are being produced in China, you see, lacquerware and so on like this, and then can bring it back. Then, as now actually, you know, even now, we get pirates in the Malacca Straits. You know, you occasionally see reports of oil tankers that have come around Singapore, and then they're coming up the Malacca Straits, and they're actually boarded by pirates. Even now, this is still happening. But in those days, it was even more so. It was very, very dangerous to go through the Malacca Straits, because they're very narrow on the one hand, and then the pirates can come out, and all the goods that you brought all the way from India or you brought all the way from China can be lost to the pirates, you know, and you might even lose your life as well. So there was another route that they were using, which was to get the wares across land here, you see. This was another way to get through without having to go through the Malacca Straits, which was so difficult. Another way was to avoid it altogether by going west of Sumatra, and then you come down west of Sumatra and you can go through this way, you see, and you can also avoid the Malacca Straits. But of course you can also get pirates here, because it's still a small kind of crossing that you've got to get through, and if they know you're coming and you've got, you know, a ship full of riches and everything, it's another way that they could do it. So these are the kind of routes that were being used. Every single one of these routes is very dangerous, but it was extremely profitable. So because of the profitability of these routes, whether by sea or whether by land, still the merchants would, you know, risk it, because you could get 10 times, 20 times, 50 times profit by taking wares that are very cheap in India and selling them in China, and then getting wares that are very cheap in China and selling them in India. Now, why are these routes so important? Because this is also the way that Buddhism spread. Buddhism spread out, as I said earlier, it went out into Kashmir, Central Asia, and then down into China. After that, it went down into Vietnam, what we now call Vietnam. Vietnam had Buddhism very early, about 1st, 2nd century. It also went up into Korea, about 3rd or 4th century, and eventually went into Japan, 5th and 6th century. But the only reason that the missionaries were able to take the religion out to these various kind of remote places was because of the trading routes. And that's why the Silk routes, whether by sea or whether by land, are very important for Buddhism, because this is how Buddhism spread throughout Asia. It not only spread, you see, to China, but it also spread down into Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar, Sumatra, Java, also into Borneo, and also into the Philippines. The bottom part of the Philippines, somewhere here, also had Buddhism, and we still find Buddhist relics there, like steles and things like this from those days. Now we take a closer look. This is the path through the Malacca Straits, and this is the Bujang Valley area. And now you can understand why the Bujang Valley became very important mercantile center. And they used to come to Bujang Valley. You know, Mount Jirai is very high and very prominent, and it can be seen from a long way off on the sea. So when the traders are coming down, they know, when they see Mount Jirai, they know if they land under Mount Jirai. In those days, the rivers from this area would go up quite a long way. Now they're all silted up, but the rivers would go inland and they would come downland. In actual fact, there was only like 30 or 40 kilometers. You had to take the goods overland. And once you've got them overland, you've got many possibilities. You can take them to Cambodia. You can take them to what is now Vietnam. There was a big center at Funan in Vietnam. And you can take them on to China as well. So to avoid the problems of going through the Malacca Straits, then they would drag the goods overland, first of all up the rivers, then when there's no more rivers to traverse, they would drag the goods over until they came to the other side of the rivers, which is where, more or less, where Lankasuka is. Actually, this is one of the most historic sites in Southeast Asia, and it's the earliest historic site in Southeast Asia. And these are the Bujang Valley sites, these red spots. These are the chandis, that means the historical monuments that are surviving from the ancient times. And there's over 170 sites around the Bujang Valley area. In fact, it came all the way down to BM. You can find monuments in BM, and then it's all the way up to SB and beyond. This is one of the things that was found. This is unfolding this. This is the original, and this is a drawing. On the sides of this are these writings, and on this side, you see, is this writing, and on the top is this writing. It's called the Buddhagupta inscription from the 5th century. And it's interestingly enough, it's in Pallava script, which is a South Indian script. And most of the scripts came from India. So these are South Indian scripts. Those are the main ones that you find. If you look at old Javanese, the old Javanese script, it's also very much like Pallava. One thing I have to say is that, one of the reasons people don't know about the Bujang Valley and the importance of the Bujang Valley is because I think the government doesn't want you to know about it. There are reports of so many objects being found in the Bujang Valley, and then they've been taken to KL and they're put in the Museum Negara, but they're put in the basement, not on show, like this. Even the Muslim archaeologists complain about the situation, There's actually hundreds, or maybe even more than hundreds, of objects that are being kind of hidden away. Whereas in any other country, I think apart from Malaysia, it would be like, something that they can show to people and everything. But in Malaysia, they seem to want to hide it. Anyway, this is one of the Buddha images. You can see it's very fine, very classical in design. That was found at Candi Pendut in the Bujang Valley. One of the problems, it's not like the remains that we find in Sumatra or Java. In the remains in the Bujang Valley are not very spectacular or interesting. They tend to be like this, and you kind of look at it and it's like a block of bricks, and you kind of walk on to the next block of bricks, So it's not like Angkor either, you see. Angkor has these fantastic heads and all like this, and these reliefs and so on that tell a story and everything. But at Bujang, we don't get it. But it's still a very important site, because this is the earliest site in Southeast Asia. It actually dates back, by radiocarbon dating, it dates back to the 1st century AD, like that, which is about 3 centuries earlier than the next kind of man-made buildings which occur in Funan in what is now South Vietnam. So we can see that as the merchants were coming out, they not only brought the goods that they had with them, you see, they also brought the culture, and they brought the polity as well, and they brought the religion. Everything came with them, and these things were adopted locally. The Bujang Valley, really, it's not, something very striking when you go and see, but there are, numerous chandis there, and it's worth having a look, and it's really a historical site in Southeast Asia. They talk about wanting to promote it as an international site. Of course, they're not going to get the visitors that they get at Angkor or at Borobudur, because it simply isn't interesting enough. But you should know that it's there. It's the earliest site in Southeast Asia. It has significance, and this is the earliest remains of these Buddhist Hindu kingdoms in Southeast Asia are actually found in Malaysia. The Bujang Valley was important because it was a place where the trade came in and could be passed over to Lankasuka, and it goes on its way. What does that bring? For one thing, it brings great wealth. Yeah, when they're transporting the goods, everybody takes their cut, obviously. They bring the goods in and they transport it, and then they add their own, thing. So, the area became rich. Wasn't what we call a phallocracy, which is a maritime empire. But the next one we want to look at, Sri Vijaya, it actually became an empire. It was based in what is now Palembang on the Sumatra coast, below Singapore, in this sort of area. And this rose a number of centuries after the Bujang Valley, probably around the 5th or the 6th century, the Sri Vijaya Empire began. And what it was really is a maritime entrepot where they were able to control the flow of trade, and then they would tax on the trade. Once you're taking tax, as every government official knows, you can become rich. You can use that money, to make more vessels and control the area and everything like that. So then they had all the other places on this route became like vassal states. That means to be able to conduct trade, they would have to pay Sri Vijaya, and Sri Vijaya would give like protection. So if you want it in simple terms, it's like a protection racket. Yeah. and they had a lot of ships, and they controlled this area, and then they ensured safe passage for the traders, and from that safe passage the traders paid money to the Sri Vijayan Empire. So this is actually quite recent, I think from the 1950s or something. The Sri Vijayan Empire was in Palembang. If you know what Palembang is, it's like a port area in Sumatra. It's on two rivers that go into the sea. Most of the housing was like this. Yeah, there's only 4 here. So it's not very many. There was more than 4 when it was the capital. But this gives you the idea. They made these houses in the river, and then the majority of people would be living in these houses on the river. And then when they want to transport or have commerce or whatever like that, then they would just get in their canoes and they just go backwards and forwards. It's very easy, of course, to travel on water. If you've seen Sumatra, it's like dense. Nowadays, it's like dense palm trees. But in those days, it was like dense and original forestry, very difficult to transverse. These days, of course, all the roads are in and all the communications are in, and you can just go and you drive across, and or you take the train or you take the bus or you fly or whatever. But in those days it was not like that. It was very dense forestry, as you can even see here, and so most of the housing was actually on the river. That has an important consequence. Because most of the housing was on the river, you can see that this is infinitely destructible. It's going to fall down into nothing once it's abandoned. It's not going to take very long before it becomes nothing. Inland, you get this area, Jambi. Jambi was somewhat inland. Now Palembang is down here, but these areas all around here are where the Sri Vijayan Empire was. Now, at one time it was on the coast here. Another time it moved inland to protect itself from raids coming from outside, you see. So Jambi is a very important Buddhist center. I went there last year because there's, in Jambi, it's Mora Jambi, they have these temple areas. Most of the remains are still underground, but some of them have been restored, and so they're quite amazing. And this area is which is where this temple part is, right? This is about 80 square kilometers where these temples are found, and there's I think there's actually something like 80 chandis in this area, but most of them are underground, but some of them are still overground. The ones that you can see marked, like Chandi Tinggi and Chandi Mora and Chandi Kemba Batu and so on, these have been restored. Now you can see it's on the river, you see. So again, how important the coastline and the rivers played, because this is how you can get communications. You can see even here, a lot of that has been cleared, but you can see it's still kind of a lot of forestry and everything like that. How far inland you can go is, a question, is a speculation in those days. So these are some of the monuments that are found in Mora Jambi. I don't know, because they don't have this relief work and there's not much stonework, it's mainly brickwork, you see. There's some stonework, but not very much. And again, it's like something like a bigger version, a better version, a more elaborate version of Bujang Valley. It's more interesting. There's many more monuments, but as I say, just like in Malaysia, you know, a lot of these places have not been properly excavated. I think myself, from what I know of Indonesia, I've been going there now for about 10 years on regular trips. The Indonesians themselves are very proud of their history. They talk about their classical period. You know, whereas in Malaysia, they try to hide anything pre-Islamic. Indonesia, it's not like that at all. They're very proud of their history, and they call it their classical period. And, you know, they take their kids and everything, you know, they bus their kids out to these historical sites, and they show them to their children and teach them about how important these sites are. So the same sort of thing happens at Muarajambi. This is another of the buildings. There's many of them, but as I say, even more are underground. I think it's like this when they find them, you know, just bricks kind of piled up around trees. They're called manapas. So these manapas, this is a very extensive manapa area where we visited, and you know, from this they reconstruct them. You can see how old the trees are, 1,000 or 1,200 years old, something like that. Really a spectacular sight. But all around here you can see the manapas. Now Muarajambi is a very important center. Why? Because you know Yijing, the Chinese pilgrim. You all know Zhongshan, isn't it? Right? Who was the probably the most important Chinese pilgrim who went to India in the I think the 7th century, 620 or something like that. And then he spent 20 years there. He collected so many texts, and then he took them back over that route I showed earlier. He took them back to China, and then he spent the rest of his life translating those texts into Chinese. Yeah. So Yijing was another pilgrim who came to India later. Now Yijing, when he came, he didn't go the land route like Zhongshan. He came the sea route. So the sea route goes via Sumatra. So he left a description of it's called something like the description of the Buddhist practices in the Malay Peninsula in the 7th century. It's got some sort of title like that. It's a very important historical record that we get from the Chinese pilgrim. It's just one of those things that the Indians didn't leave many records, the Indonesians didn't leave many records, but the Chinese were very keen on recording everything that they found when they were going through these sites. So Yijing actually spent 6 months in Sumatra at this monastery, and at that time there was about 1,000 monks who were studying in this monastery, and they're studying Sanskrit and Buddhism. Outside of India, the most important center for Buddhist studies in those days was actually Muarajambi, and this huge site that, you know, I've just been showing you the remains of. And I don't know if you know much about Tibetan Buddhism, but there's a very famous missionary to Tibet, Atisha. So Atisha, before he went to Tibet, he's a Bengali, what we now call like Bangladesh. Before he went to Tibet, he was studying in Nalanda, and from Nalanda he came to Muarajambi, and he studied with the Buddhist masters in Muarajambi, and I forget the name, Sri Lopar, I think the name is. His direct master was Sri Lopar, and it's from Sri Lopa, that he got the teachings that are now the Lamrim teachings. That means the meditation teachings in the Tibetan tradition. They actually came from Sumatra and from Atisha's master, who was a Sumatran, you see. Now again, you see, most people don't know this. They think Atisha, because he was born in India and he was a missionary in Tibet, they don't know about the connection with Sumatra and with this side, with Southeast Asia and this part of the world. But it's very important that the Lamrim teachings actually came from the meditation teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, actually came from Sumatra. That's the root of those teachings. And so Sumatra is now a really important pilgrimage site for Tibetan Buddhism. You might be surprised that Mora Jambi receives about 80,000 Tibetans as pilgrims every year. And they come in masses during Vesak, because this is where their root teacher came from. So you get, hundreds and thousands Tibetan Buddhists will come to Mora Jambi to see these sites where Atisha, had his master and where he learned, and where there were these big monasteries and everything like this, you see. These are some of the kind of minor remains, if you see what I mean. It's like dishes and pottery and so on like that. Some of it is very fine, but of course a lot of it is broken. Do you know where Bidor is? This Avalokiteshvara was found in Bidor. It's on display in the Museum Negara in KL. And it's 32 inches tall. It's nearly 3 foot tall. And it's a really huge statue, and it's bronze. And it's just found just south of Taiping. Yeah, in Bidor, you see. Yeah. Now, it's one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk, because Bidor is only just south, SP is only just north, even Palembang is only just across the water. All these areas were major centers for Buddhism in the Middle Ages. Bujang Valley starts around the 1st century AD. Yeah, and it goes up to about the 15th century. We'll come on to it later. It goes up to about the 15th century, which is when Islam came in and started getting a grip. Islam, of course, started in the 7th century. It didn't come in straight away and just conquer the whole, the whole of Southeast Asia. It's actually very late. Yeah, from the 7th century to the 15th century, which is when Islam started taking a hold, is actually 8 centuries later. During all of that time, then these areas were these Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms. Now, why do we say Hindu-Buddhist? It seems to be the case that even sometimes they were Hindu kingdoms, actually. They were worshipping Shiva and Ganesh and Vishnu and all the Hindu gods. Many times, though, they were not worshipping the Hindu gods. They were worshipping the Buddhist bodhisattvas and the Buddhas and so on. But still, the polity and the social organization was Hindu. Yeah? That means the idea, for instance, of the king being like a god incarnate, which was very prevalent in Southeast Asia. Still, if you look in Thailand, he's like Vishnu incarnate. The Chakri dynasty, they're all called Rama, isn't it? Rama is an incarnation of Vishnu, yeah? They're all called Rama. And it's understood in Thailand that, the king is like an avatar or an incarnation of the gods, like this, and then he protects Thailand. Now that idea is not so prevalent now, but it's known to Thais, I can assure you. But that used to be the situation throughout Southeast Asia. In Cambodia it was the same thing. They were like god kings. But this idea has come from Hinduism. And then the whole stratification of society was organized along Hindu lines. The Buddhists don't seem to have really developed that side of things very much. They just accepted the Hindu way of organizing things, and the Buddhists kind of concentrated just on the religious side of things, you understand? And then, the social organization and all that sort of thing, they left to Hindu. So you get this kind of Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms, organized socially according to Hinduism, but many times religious focus was Buddhism. And, it's Mahayana Buddhism and it's Vajrayana Buddhism, not Theravada. That's why we call them Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms. Another way of going through the straits, as I showed you before, is to go through the Sunda Straits here. So you can come down to avoid the Malaccan Straits, which is where all the pirates are and where all these kingdoms are that are taking your money as tribute, to let you through and everything. Another way was to come through the Sunda Straits, and then you could get down into Java. And you can also, of course, go up, into Borneo, and you can go up into Vietnam, Cambodia, and again into China, which are the important trade routes. When the Sri Vijaya Empire was waning, and one thing we have to say about these empires were they were very, very unstable. They would be flourishing in one century and they would be collapsing in the next century. Somebody else would gain power. Somebody else would gain a bigger fleet of ships, and then they would become the most important thing. So that happened also for Sri Vijaya, but eventually the Sailendras became the most important kingdom, and they were controlling the seas, also controlling up here as well, where Sri Vijaya was. They had the power to be able to extract tribute from these kingdoms along here as well. Of course, you've got Malacca here, and then you've got Kedah here. All of these areas are very important, even up in as far as into, what is now Thailand, like Chaya. In Chaya, you get Sri Vijaya remains. If you go up to Surat Thani, which is around here somewhere, then you'll find Sri Vijayan remains right the way into Thailand. You see, it's like 500 or 700 kilometers inside Thailand. Now, the Sailendras are very important because of Borobudur. Borobudur, as you may or may not know, is the largest Buddhist monument in the world. It was built in the 8th and the 9th century. That means from something like 760 to 820. All that time ago, 1200 years ago, and it's still the largest Buddhist monument in the world. And it's also one of the most impressive as well. This is where it is. If you see Jakarta is here, and then Surakarta is here, and this is Yogyakarta, like this. And Borobudur is slightly inland from that area. Now, when I was in Taiping in 2008, for those of you who go back far enough, you'll remember I was very ill. And actually, to be honest, I wasn't sure how long I was going to be around. I didn't expect to be around in 2018, really. It's the case. I was quite ill at the time. And then it came up to a situation where I had to do my visa run. That means I had to go out of Malaysia to be able to get a new visa to come in to Malaysia again. And then I thought, where should I go if I got one chance to go somewhere, and to see something? Where should I go? So I decided to go to Borobudur. I got to be outside. Indonesia is alongside Malaysia. It's not so very far away and everything like that. And so that's what I did. I went with my friend Leslie, who was living in Taiping at that time, an Australian, and we went to Borobudur, and you know, it's like a stepped pyramid or something like this. And when I first got there, I couldn't get beyond the first floor. For the first 4 days that I was visiting Borobudur, I could only get up the first flight of steps. I couldn't get up the next 4 flights of steps. But I tell you honestly, I was so inspired by what I saw at Borobudur that eventually on the 4th day, I climbed to the top. These stupas are about 10 feet or 12 feet high. These are on the top level. So these are some of the reliefs, just some of the nice photos. I'm not going to go into the stories, but you can see how, well, anyway, to me, how expressive the carving is. This is done about 1200 years ago, and just some wonderful carving. I just happened to catch this with the right light one time when I was photographing. It was actually one of the earliest photographs I took, probably from 2008 or something. Also, you see the musicians playing on a kind of lute, and here they're playing on a flute, and here they've got like a tambourine or something like that, you see. But the whole of, you know, Javanese life is illustrated on these reliefs. There's nearly 1,500 of them. It's sublime, you see. If you look at that face, to me, anyway, it just looks, you know, the expression and everything is, you know, just fantastic. The skill of the carvers, and it wasn't just one, of course. You know, it's like a whole group of carvers, but they all seem to have had this fantastic skill, you know, this amazing skill, and they could produce these wonderful carvings. So this is one that I use for the poster, you know, and it's a ship, of course, and then, you know, you've got these outriggers. You understand an outrigger, where it will stabilize the ship so when it's in the ocean it doesn't topple over if you get into a storm. So it has these outriggers and everything. And they sailed these ships, you know, not only throughout Southeast Asia, up into China, over to India and everywhere, but even to Madagascar. Madagascar is just off the shore of Africa, you know. The Madagascan language is actually an Indonesian language. And what has happened is they've sailed these boats like this over the Indian Ocean all the way over to Madagascar, thousands of miles. Working from these illustrations, they actually reconstructed a ship out of wood at Borobudur. They actually reconstructed, I mean, you can find the ship now in Borobudur. It's not on the coast, so you can't sail it. And they actually sailed it across recently, I mean in the 1990s or something like that, working from the illustrations that are found at Borobudur. This is not the only one, this is one of them. So they built the ship, they actually sailed it across the Indian Ocean all the way to Madagascar. It must be at least a couple of thousand kilometers, or maybe 3,000 kilometers or something like that, on the high sea, you know. Really a difficult journey, but they did it. Yeah. And not only did they do it, but they did it in the 8th, 9th centuries as well. Okay, Borobudur is not the only, it's not the only monument that's found around the same area, which is where the Sailendra dynasty was found. You can see this is on 3 floors, yeah? I mean, it's got a, you know, it's raised first of all, and then this is the first floor, this is the second floor, this is the third floor, yeah? This is Chandi Sari, which is on the Prambanan plain, just north of Yogyakarta, not far from Borobudur. So if you go to Indonesia, there are a lot of monuments, really a lot of monuments there to be seen from from these kingdoms, you see. This is another one. In actual fact, this photograph is taken not long after, do you remember around 2011, there was an earthquake that hit Indonesia. In fact, it happened so often you might not even remember. All of these were buildings, and then they just collapsed. This is actually Candi Sewu. Candi Sewu is the second largest Buddhist monument in Java, not in Indonesia, but in Java. It's quite elaborate, you know. There were actually, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 buildings around a central temple. This is a central temple. It still managed to stand. Now, as you see, for some reason, but we don't exactly know why, the center of power kept moving east. So first of all, you can say the center of power was in Kedah, and then it was in Srivijaya, yeah, and then it was down in Java, but central Java. That means around this area, and then it moved farther east again. So there's a couple of kingdoms. Kedari is an important kingdom in East Java, one of the earliest kingdoms in that area, and it was during...
Our next item is a song by a Malaysian Buddhist musical group called Wayfarers, who created a number of popular songs that are still sung today. They wrote songs in both Pali and English, covering mainly themes from the Buddha's teaching and personal reflections. Let us now listen to the Wayfarers.
Bright shineth the sun in his splendor by day, and bright the moon's radiance by night. Bright shineth the hero in battle array, and the sage in his thought shineth bright. But by day and by night, none so glorious and bright as Lord Buddha, the source of all spiritual light. But by day and by night, none so glorious and bright as Lord Buddha, the source of all spiritual light. Bright shineth the sun in his splendor by day, and bright the moon's radiance by night. Bright shineth the hero in battle array, and the sage in his thought shineth bright. But by day and by night, none so glorious and bright as Lord Buddha, the source of all spiritual light. But by day
concludes today's program. If you have any questions about the contents of our broadcast, please feel free to reach out to us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Our dedicated team remains committed to sharing the profound teachings of the Buddha, helping you walk the path of wisdom and enlightenment. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow at the same time.